All right. Well, again, the nice thing about this section of the book, something that I like, is that none of this material is really covered in the films at all. So, it kind of, what I found myself doing was like looking up illustrations for different things, just because sometimes I'm more visual. Like it's easier for me to process like what's happening if like I can find like an artist rendering. So like what I did for the Barrow Downs, section was like I just looked up like, different people who had drawn, kind of that whole encounter with the Barrow White and all that. So that was actually helpful for me. Okay. So a couple things that I had questions about, and I just wanted to get your guys' perspective, especially you, Larry, since you're pretty well versed in the lore. Okay, so I'm starting with the Old Forest in chapter 6. They make reference that they see the trees moving. Are these so like there's like a term for it's like Huon or Huron? I forget what they're. Yeah.
How it's pronounced? Yeah.
Are these the same thing?
Basically, yes.
And just so you guys know what I'm talking about the forest that moves in two towers to swallow up the orcs after the battle at Helm's Deep. So Larry, you're thinking this is like the same basic thing.
Yeah, horns are basically Ents, but not as sentient.
Yeah, they're not like fully awake like the Ents are, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
They don't have personalities. They're more, the Ents are to us as the horns are to animals.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, guys, so what were just some general things that stuck out? We're not going to have really anything to relate back to the films here, so we won't have that crutch to lean on this week, which I think will be good because it'll force some other conversation.
What did you guys who have not read the books yet think about Tom Bombadil?
He's a very interesting character. Like, I mean, his character itself is interesting, but just like for the plot of the book and like just his relationship to the ring, just like I don't know. It's just like I'm just trying to think like I don't know, like what was Tolkien thinking, like how, like I don't know, just right at the very beginning, putting in this like character that has no, that's not at all affected, by the influence of the ring, and obviously he's at like at least what I got from it, it seems like he's almost like a mythical, like it's like he's just I don't know, he's kind of like the wizards in that he's just been around for an incredibly long time. You like get the sense that, but that there's something special about like him as, I don't know, as a living, he's not like one of the other races or anything, but, it's just like, I don't know, it like teases you with things, but it's like, I don't know, he's just very, very mysterious. And I don't know, it was like, I guess it almost reminded me of, like in Infinity War, like when they have like Hulk immediately fight like Thanos, because it's like if they didn't do that, then the whole movie you'd be wondering like, well, what about, like, well, let's just wait till Hulk gets there. I'm sure he could take Thanos or something. And
yeah,
but it's like they just kind of like they like bring in the like possibility that there's somebody who's not affected by it, and they just immediately squash that as like a good option for someone to carry the ring.
And they'll talk about it more. They'll talk more about Bombadil later, and they'll give reasons for why. Because it's funny, the first time that I read the book, I don't know if you have this happen too, I'm just thinking like, why not just give the ring to this dude?
Yeah.
That was the first question I had, like, why not just hand it to him? So they will address that later on. Why they don't just give him the ring. I don't want to get into spoilers there, but they'll talk about it. But But I mean, there have been a lot of, of literary detectives, if you will, who have really tried to gather some deeper meaning behind Tom Bombadil. A lot of people who have tried to press Tolkien on Bombadil before he passed away to no success whatsoever.
Yeah. Now,
Sort of answer on it.
now from the limited bit of knowledge that I have about like Tolkien's other publications, like he has like an actual short story or something
About
around.
Bombadil, yeah.
And then it was also my understanding that Bombadil, like at least as far as the character itself, and I don't know, like some of the lore around him, like Tolkien had created, I don't know, like in the 30s or something, and I was like well before he'd actually written this story.
Yeah. Well, apparently Bombadil was one of the first stories that he told his kids, and so he just wanted to put them in there more for them than for anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I think that actually has a lot to do with it. Jordan, what did you think overall? We'll dive into some of the deeper parts of it, but what did you think overall of Bombadil?
So what I tried to, because you basically, I mean, we talked about how basically anything that's in these books has been gone over with a fine tooth comb, and no one knows what he is. There's no answer. There's not even any answers for what Goldberry is really.
No.
I mean, so I just I picked out like features that they took, any feature that he took the time to even point out. I tried to like see if any research would bring anything up, whether his crown of autumn leaves was references to Greeks or crowns that symbolize godhood, which is the reason why they wore them in the first place.
Well, I never thought about that.
Or the fact that he even claims that she was born either in the river, he found her in the river as a baby, which would go back to either river gods, nymphs, naiads, Undine, things like that. It was fun looking through it.
There are some people who have kind of had this whole hypothesis that Bombadil might be a manifestation of the Iluvatar, and that's hinted at by a lot of people. Again, Tolkien won't ever give any sort of answer on it, but one thing that I think is a pretty big giveaway for me, and again, I think Tolkien encourages us to find our allegory in this. So for me, I connect with the Iluvatar because the Iluvatar does everything by singing, right? That's his way of creating, and so I think it's really cool that Bombadil does everything in this joyful singing manner, and he creates and breaks down through song.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comparison between the two, and I kind of tend to agree that that's the most likely theory, is that Bombadil was effectively God. I mean, it's the thing that makes sense.
Yeah.
Given all of this, why he would put the ring on and it would have no power, and then he makes it disappear and really doesn't, like,
he doesn't care.
Look at this fun toy.
Whether or not it's the big one himself, or like, what about the idea that maybe he's just the first, like that the first that was made, the way he references
could be
his history, or like he seems sad. He seems to have, because if it's the Iluvatar himself, why would he care to not, whether or not he cares or doesn't care in terms of what he does, whereas something maybe slightly lesser than him, whether it's if the first won't leave his domain.
Yeah, I don't know. And here's the thing. Again, I think Tolkien is looking for people. This is the point. He's wanting people to come to their own inference. So whatever becomes to you at this point, I don't even like this term, but it kind of becomes your truth, within the book. And I think that's what makes it powerful. But It's funny because I like that he describes himself as eldest, and then when Goldberry asked about him, she just said, and again, if you're familiar with the whole Christian allegory side of it, when she says he is, she's not a sentence. He is.
Yes.
He just is. And that definitely has a very strong biblical, God saying I am. And so I think that there could be some connection there too.
There's a lot that points at it, but there's really nothing definitive anywhere. There's a guy that actually wrote a master's thesis on the identity of Tom Bombadil, trying to pin it on someone, in some known character, and there's just nothing definitive in all of his published writings and his letters and everything that we have. There's nothing definitive anywhere that says, yeah, this is what Bombadil is.
I love how happy he is, though. That's something that there's just no concern at all for he's not scared of anything.
Nope.
And I think that's really, I really liked when they were sleeping that first night in the house, and one by one they started having their nightmares or whatever. Frodo has that vision of Gandalf on Orthanc, so he already knows what's going on. Well, he doesn't process what's going on, but he sees the figure on top of the tower and the eagle and all that, so he knows what he's getting a forepicture of what's happening. But I thought it was funny and kind of speaks to how pure-hearted Sam is, that before he was the only one who didn't have a nightmare.
Yeah.
He just slept.
I'm fine here.
Something that was kind of fun and rang a bell to me was him telling them stories.
Yes.
To the point where they had no idea how much time had passed. Now that happens in, I believe it's part 1 of the Dark Tower, where Roland does catch his wizard, and he talks to him in terms of delaying him a little bit, and the talk actually covers like 10 years and ages into the point where he's now slower.
So you can kind of see that as a connection between the literary universes there.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's super cool. I like that Bombadil is a fan of Farmer Maggot. It's kind of sad. Farmer Maggot just gets completely he didn't. I mean, he's in the film, but for just such a little second, But we find out that he's just a whole lot cooler than what. He's one of those characters that got hugely neglected in the film.
I don't know. Yeah, because I was thinking about Farmer Maggot. What an interesting name for a character, Maggot.
Well, he uses the name Fatty a lot to
Oh yeah, like the horse, Fatty Lumpkins.
Fatty. Oh, Fatty.
I love how Bombadil just knows all the horses' names too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're actual noble horse names. I am Swishtail.
And then also that he spoke with Gildor too. That he had already spoken to the elves, and the elves had basically given him a heads up. And it's kind of nice to know that, really from the time they left, between the elves kind of passing knowledge on to him, and then later them meeting Strider, somebody has basically been, other than a few short periods of time, trying to look out for them.
Yes.
They've not really been alone at any point. And I think that's encouraging too. But yeah, that section where he puts the ring on, where he's just all right, give me the ring. That part was always ridiculous.
And as much as I love the character and I love these chapters, I totally understand why they were removed from
Same. No, it wouldn't have made any sense to put them in the movies.
And to introduce this character this early in the film and then just never have him show up in the story ever again. I mean, I get it. I hate it, but I get it.
Yeah. Well, and it makes you wonder, like, what would have happened, and again, I think part of Bombadil's power is tied to his land. So, but, just thinking about, like, wow, if you could have had a guy like that at Pelennor Fields, that would have been helpful.
Now, one thing, looking at allegory in connection with this, one thing that, regardless of what Bombadil actually represents in the Lord of the Rings pantheon, he clearly is a metaphor for earth and nature.
Yes.
And the power of the land. And this is another, a really, really early instance of Tolkien showing a little bit of his disdain for modernization.
Yes.
The ring representing the pinnacle of everything that's ever been created. Yes. And here, this guy who's the ultimate personification of what the land is, just it having no power over him whatsoever. And that's one of the metaphors he's trying to get across with that piece.
Do you think that's part of why, and I'm genuinely curious on your thoughts on this, do you think that's part of why Tolkien always writes about the dwarves outside of Gimli in kind of not a negative tone, but this very greedy, he makes a lot of references to how greedily they delve and kind of, dominate the earth.
Absolutely.
And I think that's maybe why he doesn't involve them much more than he does.
I don't believe that as a race, he envisioned them as being heroic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there are some exceptions. But
yes. Yeah, like I said, as a whole, though, he didn't see... he clearly sees the hobbits as being noble and courageous and heroic as a race. He clearly sees the elves that way. He clearly does not see the dwarves that way.
Yeah.
He doesn't see them as bad, but he doesn't see, this is a noble and heroic and, no, this is a race that wants to dig and create.
Yeah.
Instead of, it wants to manipulate the land instead of using the land.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing that I thought was really cool too, and I don't know, I've read through the book so many times, but I just never really keyed in on this, was Frodo put on the ring and tried to sneak out of the house, and Bombadil saw him.
Get over here. What are you doing?
Like, what are you doing?
Oh yeah, that is interesting, because he's not, Bombadil's not only not affected by by putting it on and by the temptation that comes with it, but it's like the people who wear it or who use it, it's like, I don't know, it's like to everyone else he goes invisible.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it's like the effect is lost as well.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting.
Anything else before we hit Barrow Downs?
One other just little fun bit of Bombadil and nerd trivia. The original Bard class in D&D, in old school original AD&D, the Bard had this ridiculous class progression that you had to be a fighter, and then you had to be a thief, and then if your stats were all 15 or higher, then you could become a Bard, and you got druid spells. The original Bard is actually patterned after Tom Bombadil.
Really?
Yes.
I would have never known that.
That, obviously it's become something else over time, but the original concept for the character was basically, hey, let's make Bombadil.
Okay, super weird question. As you guys are reading through the books, obviously there's a lot of songs. When Tom sings, what type of music or what type of voice do you hear in your head?
I do not hear the one on the audiobook.
Yeah, same.
Old Tom Bombadil, Waterloo is bringing, comes hopping home again. Can you hear him singing?
It's a little bit higher, but very full and very resonant is what what I picture.
I always picture kind of like a bluegrass sound to it. I don't know why. I don't know why. But that's just what I hear in my head whenever I hear him singing. I don't know. Jordan, what about you?
Like when he sang to the tree, I assumed it was something like soothing, soft. And whereas when he's at his house, it's obviously it's something high energy. Otherwise, the other hobbits wouldn't have started singing along randomly, whether they were under his spell or not.
Sure.
Because they didn't realize that they were even singing half the time. And then that became the only way they spoke while they were in his house.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. That therefore, and again, taking on what it would, in Valinor, so much is done through song. So it's interesting that they kind of took on that, form of communication there, if you will.
Well, song too is just tremendously important throughout Tolkien's works. It's everywhere.
Yeah. Anything else before we move on to the Barrow Downs?
I was looking through, like you were saying, you were looking through artwork and whatnot and sketches to see what people have kind of done. Hardly anyone. I only see one example where someone remotely focused on the idea that he had a crown of leaves on at one point in the story. Because he does ditch it for the hat pretty quickly.
Yeah, you see him mostly with that blue hat with the feather in it.
Mm-hmm.
But it just seemed odd that they pointed it out that when his first appearance at his home, his hat is off, but he's wearing that crown of leaves, whether that's under his hat constantly or not. Who else wore leaves? Like, in terms of the movies, it was Legolas and Dad.
Arwen. Yeah, elves typically be the ones. Yeah. You don't really see anybody who's not elvish wearing a leaf, because Elrond wears leaves.
Yeah, and the idea that Goldberry, just hearing Frodo's voice once, she knew he was a friend of the elves.
Yeah, some people think that Goldberry is an elf. There has been that people think that she is. I don't think she is. I think she's like Tom. I think she's just a family.
She's very drink and naughty too about everything.
Yeah.
Where Tom represents the earth, she represents the water.
Yeah.
And they may just be entities that exist outside of everything else.
Yeah.
Being made.
Okay, so moving on to chapter 8, Barrow Downs. I actually, if you pay close attention to this in the films, this is one thing where there is a little bit of crossover. During the siege of Gondor, when Pippin and Gandalf are on the upper levels after the freaking Witch King breaks his staff, which is dumb. Freaking blasphemy. Anyway, they're like waiting for the Rohirrim to show up, and Gandalf actually quotes the beginning of this chapter from Frodo's dream or whatever, where he talks about the veil, disappearing and far. It's like all turns to glass, white shore, and all. Like Gandalf is talking about death. Pippin's like, "Oh, is this the end?" And Gandalf said, "No, this isn't the end." And then he talks about what happens afterwards, and Pippin's like, "Oh, that doesn't sound so bad," So this section, that little section at the beginning of the chapter, is actually what Gandalf says in Return of the King in the film, and I actually thought that was cool that they pulled that from that.
Yeah, I guess I didn't catch that. That's cool.
I just watched through them, so that's why I picked up on that, because I don't know, that particular little speech moment with Gandalf was really powerful to me, and then when I read it, I was like, oh crap, that was in the movie. So we're gonna have like major disagreements when we come to talking about the film during Return of the King during that section. So we'll just another day, because I freaking hate that.
Not just for the, and I did look up Barrow Downs to see if there was anything there. All I could find was that a barrow can be a hill or a mountain, or it can be a large, it can be a mound meant to cover the remains of the dead.
Yeah.
So is the whole title of the area meaning like beneath the dead, or beneath the hills of the dead, or?
So the Barrow Downs, if you don't know a lot about their history, so that whole area, there were several kingdoms that kind of rose and fell in that area. The Númenóreans, who kind of first took up residence there, and a lot of the men of the Westerness are buried in the Barrow Downs. And so when the Witch King took over that area of Middle-earth, him and Sauron sent the Barrow Whites to basically guard that area and make sure that men could no longer dwell there.
Is that why those daggers that they mentioned are such well-made things there and things
Those
like that?
those are in fact Númenórean or Dunedain blades. And one thing right away, anytime they talk about a snake crest on something, that's typically going to involve the Dunedain in some way.
Oh, okay.
So, Larry, I'm correct on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because Aragorn wears a ring that has like a snake signet on it, and that's a Dunedain symbol. Men who were of the Númenórean bloodline. Larry, you mentioned this earlier, and I remember this reading through this section. Tolkien pauses here for a second whenever they get separated. Frodo's the only one who's still conscious,
Mm-hmm.
and he's all scared of the Barrow Whites, but then the courage starts welling up in him, and makes a point to say hobbits are far more courageous.
Yes.
Even the fattest, and something else hobbit has courage, and Frodo was neither the fattest or the weakest or something like that. He said, in fact, Gandalf and Bilbo saw him as the greatest of all hobbits. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can see too in the way he writes that, the temptation of the ring, very explicitly in Frodo's mind, going, I could put on the ring and I could get away and I'd feel really, really bad about them, but at least I'd be alive. And that's what they want. Gandalf would admit there's nothing else I could have done.
Yeah.
It's very, very, very clear, the distinction between the temptation of the ring and just the natural mettle of the hobbit to overcome that.
Yeah. No, and there's definitely something special about them. I always get kind of confused by this section when they're, when the whites just take their clothes and redress them and new garments, and I never really got any of that. It never made sense to me how that all happened in that amount of time.
Well, the passage of time there is kind of nebulous. That whole piece is told from the point of view of Frodo as the narrator.
Yeah.
So when Frodo starts to get lost in the Downs and eventually is overtaken by the white spell and blacks out, we don't really at that point have any sense for how much time passes in any of that. It's not a lot of words on the page, but there's no way of knowing exactly how much time actually went by in it.
I just thought it was interesting that the whites took the time to redress them all in these white linens and cover them in all this jewelry, and then they lay that sword across all three of their necks.
Hmm.
And it's like they were performing some sort of ritual or something.
That's exactly what was intended. Even when Tolkien talks about how Frodo hears singing, but it's becoming an incantation. It's clear that the hobbits were intended to power some sort of ritual there.
Yeah,
Do we know what it was at all, or?
I know. Yeah. Yeah, I this part of the book always kind of confused me a little bit. I just didn't really know what the overall purpose of that section is, other than to more highlight Bombadil's power. He comes in and
Yeah, well, you're seeing a little bit now of the active power of Sauron at play,
yeah,
because the whites are all derived from him.
yes,
So you're seeing a little bit of his power at play. You see a little bit of the otherness of his power too, in the fact that like, what are they doing? This isn't like a wolf that's hungry and wants to eat. Something strange and evil is happening here. So
yeah,
you get a little bit of that too. And there's also the whole MacGuffin delivery system here of the hobbits need to have the swords.
yeah, yeah, and that I really enjoyed, the way that Tolkien set up Bombadil kind of coming to rescue. Obviously the singing again, Bombadil coming in, and what I liked is, after they got everybody out, it says, that they could tell Frodo one last time saw it looking like a spider, a damaged or an injured spider, and then can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. And then Bombadil goes back in there and they hear a bunch of thumping. So
then Bombadil comes out having casually looted the barrow.
he just went in there and kicked everything's ass and took all their loot.
Bombadil was actually the only murder hobo in the entire story.
So the Barrow Whites, like does it like explicitly like say that I don't know that they're like connected to Sauron? Because like that's not really the picture that I had from, because it's like I don't know, like the world itself. I don't know. It's like we saw like in chapter 6 where it's just like, oh, there's these these trees, and it's like, oh, they're about to. I don't know. It's like it seems like there's just like just like other things like in the world, and I don't know. It's just like it doesn't like explicitly. I don't know. Like I mean, it's like they're obviously not good, but at the same time, like I don't know. I might have missed something where like I didn't.
It's not explained in this book. I'd have to go back to where I read it, but I'm almost positive that it was. I know I've read somewhere in the Legendarium at large that the Witch King, I believe, was the one who set them there.
The Witch King?
The Witch King of Angmar, yeah. He's the guy in Return of the King who fights, Eowyn kills.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I hate him. He's my least favorite character in the films because he's a bastardization of what Tolkien meant to be, but we'll get into that later. But
now, one thing too, in the actual song incantation that they're singing, the whites themselves are singing, "In the black wind the stars shall die, and still on gold here let them lie, till the dark Lord lifts his hand over dead sea and withered land." They're acknowledging Sauron.
Okay.
And again, whether or not he's clearly created them directly or set them in motion, or one of his underlings did it, they clearly acknowledge his primacy in their power structure.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I-
Let them
I-
here until Sauron. Let them lay here until Sauron's done.
yeah, like I said, I think what happened was whenever the Witch King Vangmar took over, he basically sent them there to make sure that men couldn't inhabit that area anymore or go and get any of their old stuff,
Yeah.
like powerful weapons and things in there that he did not want them to have.
Yeah.
So basically, similar to how when Sauron was the necromancer and Dol Guldur, to kind of summon spirits and things like that. The Witch King has similar abilities. And in the books, I like the Witch King. He's a really cool character. I just hate him in the films. So.
Yeah. One other thing I thought was interesting. I guess it's like whenever, Larry, you put in the perspective of the fact that there's not explicit time, but it's like I thought it was interesting. It's like at the start, it's like Tom Bombadil kind of like sends them on their way. It just kind of like lets them go, and then they get into trouble, and then he remembers, he sings, and then he immediately comes back and saves them, and then leads them like to the end of his land. And I was just like, why didn't he just like take them, I don't know, like as far as he could, and then let them go, as opposed to like letting them wander through this
MacGuffin.
Because Goldberry was waiting.
Yeah.
He had a place to be.
No, they had to get the swords.
Yeah, I mean, really, they have to get the swords. I mean, that is the actual answer.
Okay. So
I think that's probably a lot to do with it.
So the swords, they end up being important later. I don't know.
Yes.
Yes, they do. They're very good swords, and they do play a part. Going through the books for sure. And I don't want to get into spoilers, but they do play a part. But up to this point, they really don't have any way to defend themselves either.
Yeah. Frodo even mentions in his thoughts how the idea that defending themselves was something he never even considered that they'd have to do on the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like it's been a while since I've seen the movies and stuff, because it's like I remember, Frodo's got Sting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm like, I don't think the others ever had anything.
And Frodo doesn't actually have Sting
yet.
No.
Okay, it's different. Okay.
Now I know in the films, Brett, correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a long time since I've seen Return of the King. But doesn't Merry stab one of the wraiths? Is it a wraith or a fell beast?
I think it's one of the I think it's the Witch King.
Yeah. He stabs the Witch King. Doesn't kill him, obviously.
But he brings him down, and then Arwen.
Yeah, he's able to wound the Witch King because he has the Westernest blade.
Yeah.
Well, but in the movie, it was like I think Merry and Pippin were given those by the elf.
Galadriel. Yeah.
Okay. So that's how they. So, but does that do they get that from her in the books, or is that, or was that their way of getting it to?
No, that was basically the way they made it happen in the movie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Since they didn't do the Barrow Downs because Tom Bombadil.
Yeah.
So Brett, I took it as a personal challenge to find some reason to bring up Dark Souls.
Oh,
Yes.
And
okay.
I did it. I found you some tidbits. First off, it's a story of the time becoming a land transitioning from the time of gods and ancients to the time of man. That's the overall theme for sure in all three games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A lot of the religion And the story itself takes place on the worship of the sun as the life giver, as the source of power, as something that's not supposed to fade. Whereas the gods and the Dark Souls are trying to cling to that and keep it going. And then yet you have Gandalf's flame that he mentions, correct?
Yeah.
And then they use the word Anor in Anor Londo to name the city of the gods, which is taken from one of Tolkien's languages.
I like it.
Going back to what you guys were saying about the time disparity, I do think from just a writing standpoint, this is one of his weaker chapters because of that.
Yeah.
He spends, up until this point, the entirety of the book is basically written as a third-person omniscient narrator. You know, someone who knows the story is telling the story. And then it shifts more directly and pointedly to Frodo's point of view and only Frodo for a while, to try to, you know, and it's to try to add that sense of mystery and build that up here. And I just don't think it lands as well as a lot of the other writing does.
I think that's a pretty good point.
Again, had to get them MacGuffins. So
Yeah, and you know, the swords are important. You know, it's interesting because, you know, there's definitely an adolescent part of me that always likes, I've always liked, you know, the idea of who would beat who. You know, that's always something that I like to sit and think about. I just do, you know, like even in the Marvel universe or comparing different universes, you know. But, you know, in this particular circumstance, I genuinely do believe the book does somewhat address this. There is this very strong undertone of where you fight, where you are is very important to that fight.
absolutely.
If that makes sense. And I've said this before, like if I take Galadriel and I march her into Mordor, she's going to get destroyed because that dark, she can't handle that level of darkness. Mm-hmm. But take Sauron and march him into Lothlorien, he may not lose, but it's not going to be fun.
Yeah.
And same with Bombadil. I think, you know, if any of these nefarious characters were to set foot on his doorstep, it would not go well for them. You know,
that'll actually get mentioned.
It does.
Down the road, Tolkien basically directly addressing exactly that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I don't want to get into that, obviously, because that's that whole part of the book there in the Council of Elrond, there's so much good lore to spin out on. That's going to be really fun because they go really deep in the lore there. So that'll be fun. Yeah. Well, we got about 5 more minutes. One thing I've been wanting to do every week is just close by who was your favorite character in this section of the book? It's okay if it's all the same person.
It's Bombadil.
Yeah. Fatty. Fatty was the real hero.
Found all the other ponies.
Spoke their language, man.
Well, I don't know why. I'm just like, oh, it's such a great horse name.
Fatty Bulger.
I just like, I don't know. I like picture, I don't know, just I'm trying, there's like this like cartoon image in my mind of this character. And it's just like, I picture this incredibly hefty horse with like really short stubby legs, but almost like has like a Fabio kind of like glow, you know, about like that's like my image of what Fatty Lumpkin.
Lil Sebastian. Oh no. All right. So Bombadil for Larry, Jordan, Bombadil for you.
I'm gonna put it as a tie and put the pair of them, Bombadil and Goldberry.
Yeah.
And now I keep seeing when I look her up, it says, I mean, are they actually married? It says spouse all the time on her.
Yes, they're married.
Yes.
Okay.
Kevin, what about you? Fatty? Fatty?
Yeah, I mean, I already put mine out there.
Yeah. Kevin, stick with Fatty. I'm actually going to say Frodo. And every other time I've read it, Tom has always really stuck out to me. But this time, I feel like just reading it from a different perspective. Frodo was super impressive to me in the Barrow Downs. And I thought that was... it shows just how hardy of a folk the hobbits are, that he's able to resist, the temptation to put on the ring and just be like deuces and leave everybody there to die.
Yeah.
Now, were we meant to take that as the ring trying to get him to wear it again, or?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, I know. Okay, so if we go to the quite your normal topic about comparing it to the movies, they haven't mentioned at all. So, like, was it an invention of the movies to have him have those weird visions while he's wearing it? Whereas the book, he just seems to put it on, take it off, and doesn't really see nothing.
That will come.
Or is that covered in his nightmares in the book?
He will start having like encounters with dark forces when he puts the ring on.
Okay.
Yeah. Sauron can see him when he puts the ring on.
Yes. So most of what the movie shows when he has the ring on is true to the story.
Yeah.
Okay. Now him slipping it on while in Bombadil's domain, is that going to have an effect at all, or did that slowly aim them back towards being chased again, or no?
I don't know. I would think Sauron probably wouldn't be able to see him there. I don't know.
That's why I was wondering if that was like a blind spot.
I would imagine, and again, this will get referenced again, but the blind spot's probably the best way to put it there. That's probably somewhere safe. Because again, they talk about Tom Bombadil directly at the Council of Elrond. And when, the other rings that are out there that are actively getting used are effectively hidden from Sauron's sight, even though they're being used.
Yes.
So I'd imagine, going back to what Brett said about location mattering so much, that Bombadil probably has a similar effect on his land, keeping it safe from the gaze of the enemy.
Okay.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
Speaking of, by the way, just another tidbit that just hit me. That recent game, Control, the Men in Black kind of supernatural thing.
Yeah.
There's an odd Enigma character there that's kind of like your quest guide, and he's the janitor. And he very much has a domain. Nothing ever gets near him. He comes and goes, mentions things in weird languages, gives you a couple items here and there to help you out. He goes on vacation, quote unquote, and you got to go get something from him. And he just kind of sings in his radio and gives you a cool rock song during a segment. Like,
Yeah.
Could be a Bombadil.
Again, as we go through this, you're just going to see in these characters how over and over and over in fantasy-derived stories, how influential this work really was on everything.
Yeah, agreed. No, it is just a great read. I mean, it really is. I love reading this. It's funny, for as many times as I've read through it, I still enjoy through it. It's never gotten old for me.
And
Well,
there's always something you can take from it that maybe you didn't get on the last pass.
Yeah. Kevin, what were you saying?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, like I said, I just really liked his writing style. Like I don't know, it's I'm just like, well, maybe it's just like from like the time period or something, but it's just like there's something just really refreshing about it. It's like especially when you compare it to like more like modern like books, just the language itself, just I don't know, it's definitely less less colorful, less I don't know, it just feels so much more mundane, like our like I said, like more like modern books. But I don't know. I feel like the way that he words things is just very, very captivating, And I don't know. It was just, I mean, just clearly was a good at writing, but I feel like that's partially like what makes it so enjoyable.
Oh yeah.
Just kind of go through it because it's like, yeah, I don't know. I don't feel like I feel like I'm reading something timeless as opposed to like, I don't know, just the latest like fantasy book by, so and so in America, in 2020. It's very good. I think.
Well, guys, thanks so much. Is everybody enjoying this?
Yeah.
It's having a good time, and
This is a highlight of my week.
Oh, good. So, all right. So next week we have The Sign of the Prancing Pony, Strider, and A Knife in the Dark. Which I'll be honest, have never been like my favorite part of the book, but I'm looking forward to it nonetheless. I always have a hard time being patient because the next section of the book is like one of my absolute favorite parts of this book.
And business kind of picks up from there anyway.
Yeah, it gets to me the most exciting is book 2 of Fellowship.
Yeah. So how does that work? Because like that's one thing I noticed. Like, I mean, Fellowship, Two Towers, and Return of the King. It's like there's 3 books, but then Fellowship is
They're all 2.
They all have 2 sections to them, but
they're actually 6 books.
If it was broken up, Tolkien intended it to be as 6 books, and the publishers insisted on the 3. They didn't want 1 because it would have been too big, and they didn't want 6. They insisted on 3. So when we actually get to read the Two Towers, we actually follow one story thread for the entirety of the first half of Two Towers.
Oh.
And then we follow the other because he wrote them as 2 books. One book having no mention of the hunters and the hobbits, and the other book having no mention of Frodo, Sam, and Gollum.
Okay, cool. That's that. Yeah. Okay. I wasn't clear as far as like.
And Two Towers is definitely a lot more demonstrative with that than any of the other ones. You definitely get the sense that these are 2 different. I mean, they're 2 stories that are connected, but setting-wise, they don't dive into Frodo getting closer to Mordor until until the second book.
Yeah, even though that stuff is happening, fairly contemporaneously.
Yeah,
he's telling it as 2 separate stories and what he intended to be 2 separate books.
Yeah. Well, guys, everybody have a good night, and we'll see everybody next week.
All right, bye, guys.
Bye.